So we haven't planned a performance, as you might say. We've just agreed that we'll have a bit of a conversation amongst ourselves about ITSE, IBAP, and so on. And you are invited to join in. So I'll begin by saying a bit of background so that some people don't know what I'm talking about and others know well. Because I've always had an interest in the psychological. I was a psychotherapist, and before that, a psychiatric social worker. I worked in psychiatric hospitals and so on. So my interest in Buddhism included an interest in Buddhist psychology, Buddhism as psychology. You can look at Buddhism as a psychological system, amongst other things. And so at a certain stage in the history of the Amida movement, I created this organization called ITSE, which stands for International, well, Instituto Terapia Zen Internacional. It was in Spain. And now it's moved its center of gravity to London. With a view to, well, you could say with a view to fostering Buddhist psychology and its applications, or you could say with a view to propagating Buddhism via the vehicle of psychology. These, in a way, are like two different ways of looking at the same thing. And one of the things that I've tried to do in several of my books is to elucidate in a way that the ordinary reader might be able to understand some of the material that is in some of the Buddhist texts, which is clearly psychological in nature. And so I've taken material from the Abhidhamma. Most people would find the Abhidhamma hard going as it'd be good bedtime reading. It would put you to sleep in no time, but not easy to understand. So I've made an effort to translate it into a form that could be useful. And in the process, I've drawn parallels with Western systems of psychology and tried to show where it is similar and tried to show where it is different. And at the same time, I've tried to base my own practice of psychotherapy, particularly, upon these Buddhist principles. And out of that has come the development of several things, including an online program of training in Buddhist psychology, which is now looked after by largely by Sustama. Sustama's not here, is she? No. So we have to manage without Sustama. But if you are interested in the Buddhist psychology program, then she's the person to to turn to. But we developed this online program many years ago now, and this was partly because I was running many weekend courses, and I didn't want the course time, the attendance time, as it were, just taken up with the theoretical dimension. I wanted the course time to be a time when we actually practiced and learned skills and interacted with one another, and not time where we just learned principles. So all the principles were put into this online program so that you could learn them separately. so that people could learn the principle, the theory in their own time. And that would free up the attendance time for more practical work, which could only be done when people were actually together with people who could demonstrate and so on. And in due course, we ran this program in Spanish. And this is where Natty comes into the picture. Because although I have some Spanish, I'm by no means fluent. And Natty did the course. I can tell you something about the course and what it was like to be on it, I'm sure. And then became a tutor on the course. So now she tutors Spanish speaking people who want to do this program. We also did the program in Korea. I went to Korea every summer and gave a summer school for, I went there, I think 7 or 8 years every summer, and ran a summer school there. And none of us spoke Korean. so this was more challenging. And but they took it on, and they would meet regularly and translate the material themselves into Korean, and have seminars in Seoul on the material. And as I said, I would go in the summer, and we would have skills workshops. So that was a great experience for me, and I hope it was useful to them. And you know, this actually came about because I was invited to go and give a lecture in Seoul, and they had this system whereby they would invite somebody from the West to go to Korea and give a lecture once a year. And they picked people who had written books about Buddhism and Buddhist psychology. And I'd written Zen therapy, so I was on their list. And they would invite a different person each year. But it happened that the talk that I gave sort of hit the spot, as it were, because the talk that I talked was on the question of, could there be such a thing as a truly Buddhist psychotherapy? Because so much of psychotherapy, as we know it in the West, is about building self-esteem, self-entitlement, self-care, self this, self that, self the other. And this really runs against the grain of Buddhist teaching. So is it possible? Can you have a psychotherapy that does not build self-obsession or exceeding self-concern at the same time as it's solving problems? You know, I think often Western style psychotherapy has the effect of solving some problems while creating another problem. And in a sense, it sort of shoots itself in the foot. So I talked on this theme, and I said, you know, I don't have all the answers. I don't know fully what the answer to this question is even, but I'm working with it. I'm trying, and we've built up a body of material, and I talked about it, and ideas that came out of the Buddhist principles. And at the end of the lecture, they said, this is music to our ears. Can you come and teach it? I thought, well, I'm not sure. I don't speak Korean. How do I teach counseling and psychotherapy if I don't know what people are saying? So that was quite a challenge, but I said I'd have a go. And that led to me making, as I say, many visits to Korea. And I learned a huge amount. There's nothing like, as a Buddhist from the West, going to a strongly Buddhist country where half your audience have got PhDs in Buddhism, and trying to say something to them that might be useful to them. because they have very sharp questions, and they already have a great deal of knowledge. And anyway, they found what I said sometimes useful and sometimes challenging, and they would challenge me back. And in the course of this, I learned a lot, and I could go into details there, but I think you get the general sort of picture. So I have been learning in this domain for a long time, and I'm still learning. Every time you read the Buddhist sutras and the Buddhist source materials, you see something new, and again. And it was very nice in Tineka's talk being taken to the Prince Abhaya Sutta, and what is said there, and how relevant it is. You can go back to these texts so many times. And then you start making connections, and you think about other dimensions and so on. And the fundamental underlying principles, of course, are very simple, but universal compassion, anybody can say that. It's just 2 words, but how do you actually put it into practice? That may be the principle behind everything, but not so easy. So this was ITSI, and it gradually developed. And ITSI, we can say, is concerned with the application of Buddhist psychology broadly, or with the application of Buddhism considered in a psychological medium broadly. Within ITSI, we have created another group, which we call IBAP, which is Institute for Buddhist Analysis and Psychotherapy, which is more specifically concerned with counseling and psychotherapy. And the IBAP group, some of whom are here today, we have been meeting regularly for, I don't know, when did we start, Iris? When did it? Iris has disappeared.
I think we started IBAP after the ITSI conference in September 2019 in Holland.
Yes, that's right, because we had discussions at the conference.
Yes. We had our a year before a group of sharing cases and kind of co-sharing and co-supervision or peer supervision, something like that. But then we decided to build IBAP and a group of supervisors, and to understand deeply the ideas of supervision in Buddhist psychology. Not only Buddhist psychology and the principles and the philosophy of Buddhist psychology, but also supervision, of course, based on the same philosophy and practices and principles.
Yeah. And yes, and that has led to us actually running some supervision groups, which has been a very interesting experience. And well, I've been supervising, but you've been actually in the group, and so has Natty. So maybe you can say something about those groups.
About the supervision groups?
Yes.
Well, yes, it was a great challenge. It was my first experience in this sort of group, but I find it was a natural response to a need that we have as therapists, counselors, or helpers in a broad way of having a space of supporting and yes, and listening and sharing. And it was, I think it was a great adventure, in the sense that we were in some way growing in this. Yes, in this realization. At the beginning, you have some ideas in advance about how it's going to be, how it should be, but afterwards, the reality comes up again and appears, and the necessity of taking into account that humanity, that support, for me is the great thing. For me, it's a necessary respond to our need as human beings. Independently, we are counselors, therapists, but in this particular role, it's necessary to have this group of orientation, of sharing, of confession in some way. Is a space of opening the eyes, and I think that the group that started with this experience was showing itself in a very beautiful way. And there were many sharings about different therapeutical cases, very interesting, the different exchanges in the group. And at the same time, yeah, as I said, also the humanity of each person taking part of the group was also present, and is also important, and we are all learning with that.
Yes, and it's been kind of experimental, and for all of us. And you've worked together and one of the things in the group was that different combinations of group facilitators would work together.
Yes, we also tried to combine, to understand supervision, what is supervision in Buddhist psychology, by ourselves in our supervision group with you as our facilitator and supervisor, and then doing it with the extra supervision group that we were facilitated and supervised. And it was a great support for the participants, but also for us it was a deep learning, or deep co-learning, or mutual learning, and it helped to develop more the idea of supervision in Buddhist psychology, because we really felt, I think, four of us, the facilitators, really we are channels of the perspective of this way of therapy. And also I think we touched also sometimes some pieces, not only from the Dharma, but also from Carl Rogers sometimes, and a little bit of the relational psychology, and combining and trying not to do diagnosis or differentiations or definitions. And it was really great. And also there is a little surprise also for you, Dharma, Vidya, and Nati, that Sustama and I decided for this second group to give a small, very small introduction, like of 5-10 minutes of something theoretical from the Dharma, from the Buddhist psychology, and then discussing in the rooms, in the small dyads, and then sharing a case. So this is the new thing that we are doing now, without asking a permission.
I think it's really interesting, and this is a good thing, because yeah, both dimensions are important in learning. Maybe you are talking about Buddhist psychology training, or this supervision space or supervision groups, because there is an external or evident part that you can, in some way, you tend to grasp, like the theory, the different models of mind and all these things, the applications in therapy. But there is also another dimension, we could say a vertical dimension, which is something that you cannot grasp, the same as in life. And it's good to have this balance between both of them. Both of them are one with the other. Sometimes we tend to stress too much on theory, and tend to forget about this other dimension, this other dimension which can, as I said, which cannot be grasped. And this is one of the great challenges of therapists, I think. On the other hand, if you are only based on a sort of spiritual or metaphysical dimension, you can lose something very important, which is the background and the root of all of it, which is. So I think this balance between both, it's very important to maintain and to
Yes, and Buddhist psychology is really grounded in the Buddhist principles of conditioning. The notion that everything arises, everything in ordinary worldly life arises on the basis of conditions. And if you change those conditions, then some change has to happen. Maybe a good change, may not be a good change, but some change has to happen. And so often the matter of Buddhist psychology is to understand what are the conditions that are holding the thing in place, whatever the thing might be. And some of those conditions are external, and some of those conditions are internal. Some of those conditions are in the present. Some of those conditions are in the past. And stating it in very broad terms here, you know, you go to the Abhidharma, there's lists of the kinds of conditions and what effects they tend to have. And so, as Natty said, on the one hand, there's kind of a wealth of theory and specific principles and ideas. And at the same time, there is running through it what's just been called a vertical dimension, but a spirit of compassion and so on, in much the same way as Tineke spoke about the precepts, that you have the specificity of precepts and you can work out what is right in this situation and what's right in that situation. But running through it all is a principle of kindness, compassion, and wisdom, and so on. And these two things work together. But we can talk about these things like we're doing now, and like we did in the group that Iris has talked about, that was running for a couple of years or so. But it's another matter to actually sit down with a group of other people talking about specific concrete cases where somebody is suffering, and how does this actually apply in this particular situation. So it's been challenging for us in that way, bringing these principles up against real life. And it's also been challenging in you know, we are a group of disparate people from different countries with different backgrounds. And we've been co-working, and you know, one week Natty is working with Sustama, and the next week she's working with Iris, and this is different, you know, each time it's different. And so there are things to learn from that at a very human level, things that are not necessarily easy to put into theoretical terms, but are simply about how do you gel with another personality. And I think this is something that is not just limited to ITSE, this is something that applies to all of us. We can have fine principles, but then, you know, we all want to save the world, but can we live with our neighbor? and this may be much more difficult to deal with the specificity of co-working with another human being, even if we've spent 2 years together discussing things in theory. To actually sit down and co-work is not so easy necessarily. So we're all learning in that way, I think.
I think usually when we are co-facilitating or co-supervising, we have our or partner as someone whom we know, and actually with whom we are training together before going and facilitating, and or as co-facilitating. And here we tried to do these changes, really practicing impermanence or non-attachment, because I cannot be attached to Nati now. Now we are going on very well, so let's do it together. No, you cannot be attached to Nati. You have to change. You have to practice the impermanence, and also the changing groups. From time to time, the supervision groups will be changed. They already have been changed, and yes, I'm coming from the area of clinical psychologist. Before I was a Buddhist psychologist, so this is also interesting for me, but also for the others to work with me. Like, I'm kind of different, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, all these that you are talking about is remind me of this idea of so important of interaction, as we are interaction, and we are always I think we are first, as I once heard, we are first interaction than individuals, even, because depending on what's the situation, who is the person you are with, the experience is totally different. For example, when I have a problem, an issue, or whatever, it's very difficult when I tell it to myself every night with the same words. This is my story. That when I tell you to a good friend of mine, that when I tell or when I put it in the hands of Amida, they are completely different experiences. And this is, I think, because of the encounter or the interaction is different, has a different quality.
Yes.
And yeah, that's why I think it was so interesting, this change. It was a challenge. It was very difficult in some way, but it also was very interesting to see how the qualities, the vibration, everything changes with different interaction. Well, sometimes, well, they here in the supervision groups, with the Buddhist psychology, in the therapeutical space, the question is, what is the sort of interaction that can heal, that can help the other? And here is the great challenge for every of us in our work, or accompanying well, in the company of others. We want to help or whatever, because there is also this other important fact, that is, we are bamboo creatures. We are bamboo therapists at the end. So it's not easy to have always this true encounter, being a bamboo creature. That's why I think it's so valuable, these spaces of supporting and guiding and listening, and accepting our experience just as it is. I think this is valuable, and these interactions can be a great help.
Yes, because we in the last session we were looking at what do you say when? What is true, what is useful, and when do you say it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is not going to be the same with every person. So in therapy, there arises a sort of question of, well, what would you say to this person? Which aspect of your life would you feel safe discussing with this person?
Mm.
And what about that person? Perhaps you discuss a completely different part of your life with that person. If you move from one therapist to another, and then the two therapists meet and talk over coffee, they might not even recognize that it was the same person that they were talking about. Because we present ourselves in a way that somehow sort of fits with the interlocutor, with the other person in the dyad.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you're in a conversation with somebody. Partly you're looking for how do I create a semblance, at least, of harmony with this person. And that's one of the sources of the what in a way is dishonesty that we were discussing earlier, because you put a spin on things, you tailor things this way, or you twist them that way, in the hope that presented in that way, they will gel with this particular person that you're talking to. And so obviously, if your therapist is a man or your therapist is a woman, if your therapist is young or your therapist is old, if your therapist is a Buddhist or is a clinical psychologist or whatever, you're going to have certain assumptions. And on the basis of those assumptions, you're going to present an image of yourself one way or another. And is that image true? And does it matter? Is the aim to be painfully naked all the time? George was saying in our little group in the last session that he'd participated in a short period when people determined to be completely truthful, and at the end of it they decided that was not a good idea. It was just too painful. So we're all exceedingly skilled in building an image of some sort or other. And in a way, we co-create images when we're with somebody else. And in a certain sense, this is building illusion. But it can be useful. It can be a good thing. It is not easy to make judgments in this area. This is one of the tricky dimensions of psychology. And then, as I said, Buddhist psychology, very much about the conditions. You can look at the same thing as I've just been talking about from that point of view. The mind, we would say, principle of Buddhist psychology, the mind is conditioned by its object. Well, sometimes the object is the person you're talking to. And you are conditioned the minute you walk into the room and you see this person who is going to be your therapist, or if you're the therapist, the client comes in the room and this is the person you're going to work with. Immediately, your mind is being conditioned by this encounter, by the way the person looks, by the way they move, by the way they sit, and so on. So you're not coming just as you. You are part of an interaction from the very beginning. And so this Buddhist principle of non-self is very relevant here, because you're not a self that presents itself. You are something that is affected by a whole set of conditions and shaped by that set of conditions. And part of what you're doing is unraveling that and finding out what those conditions are, and sometimes changing them, sometimes intervening in some way or other, deliberately, disrupting. So Buddhist psychology is partly establishing harmony and being empathic and understanding and smooth in that sense, but it's also partly disruptive. It's partly about intervening in a way that upsets the apple cart, that pulls away the props that are holding a particular attitude or presentation or something of that kind in place. So it has both those aspects. And you know your Buddhist stories. Sometimes they're very harmonious interactions between people, but quite a lot of Buddhist stories are about rather sparky interactions, where there is some sort of challenge between two. You think of your Zen stories. There's a certain amount of encounter there, and there's a refusal to buy into something that is not necessarily true, is not necessarily deep. But of course, that's not easy and often not comfortable to do.
Yeah, that's why I think we need help, and we need. At least I speak in my name. I'm very I feel grateful, very grateful, because the Buddhist psychology training, in my case as a student, showed me this way. Apart from teaching me a lot about Buddhist psychology, the methods, all this coming from the Abhidharma, and these applications, all this, but it's always changing you or challenging you with the direct experience of life. And in some way, I was trying once more to get more knowledge, to become a better therapist, and by trying by taking a new course. And gradually, I felt this process of opening the eye, of opening really what I was doing, the way I used to. Or I used to put my intention to try to respond my own agenda in therapy, the way I can ignore even the person I have in front of me, or I had in front of me. So it was a sort of awakening, and the fact of realizing and seeing all this is something very valuable. In my case, this was the first step to become a Buddhist afterwards. This was my door, my entrance to Buddhism. Through this curiosity, I found something I was not expecting. And so, well, I like to be with the students now, because I go on learning with them, and I need to go on learning. I think this is for all my life, but I feel this gratitude for being able to see a little bit more of my difficulties, of my difficulties, apart from the fact that I have to say as well that I was studying at the university thousands and hundreds of theories, and suddenly I found that in some model of mine, it was everything all wonderfully described. I was so astonished, and well, I have in some way to decide what way to follow, and I decide to follow this this way, and I'm so happy to go on with this. But this, I recognize this need of help, and this capacity of seeing what I'm doing as a bamboo therapist, and how can I cultivate this inspiration or creativity, this to be open to something else that is beyond my capacity, of course. And well, I think that the training responds to this beautifully. And so in that way, I think that this connection for me between these two concepts in some way expresses that this training or these spaces of supervision can be also an expression of the Dharma, because it can help everyone to go ahead, to go deeper in his experience of life. Well, that's my personal view of it.
Well, you've talked a bit there about the training course. I wonder if Nando would like to share a little bit, because you've also participated in this.
First, sorry, I would like to say that next year in January a new course for Spanish students is going to start, and this is in great part thanks to Nando and Azucena, because they are doing a huge and marvelous work of translation, and this is so important. So thank you very much to Nando. He was my great companion in the learning process, and it was great. It was very rich to have it with me. Thank you, Nando. I cannot see it now, but thank you.
Yeah, but it was a great process. All this course, we did the first psychology Buddhist course in Spanish. I did it, in fact, I did the first course ever. And Nati joined me the next year because she started 1 year later.
Yeah.
So I waited some months just to wait for her, because I was alone in the course. I was by myself. And so I said, I cannot make this course by myself. This is a healing process. This is a auto-therapy process. So how can I do it by myself? I need some companion. So I wait for some months to Nati just to follow with the course. And that was a marvelous experience. Mm. I think we learned a lot together. It was really good. And one of the biggest learnings for me in this course came from you. You showed me how important it is to recognize your fragility. I don't know if it's English. It's very important. Recognize this in yourself. And this is for me one of the biggest learnings ever, Buddhist learnings in my life. So thank you so much. Because you helped me, you really helped me to understand it. And for me, it's one of the biggest learnings of this course. Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you.
Yes, sorry. Go on.
No. nothing else to say.
Well, I think we can broaden this conversation. If there's other people want to chip in, the sort of broad framework, ITSE in a sense has three elements now. It has the element that we've talked mostly about in this session, which has been the IBAP and the psychotherapy and psychotherapy supervision. It runs conferences every couple of years, and it has the training program that we've just been talking about, and that Nati and Nando did. So it's that's how far we've got. I mean, who knows what the future holds, but this is in a way as a sort of work group, developing new things. And we're
I have one question.
Yes, yes.
The theoretical course, is it still on? Is it alive? Are you still writing new things or adding new things in the course?
Not right at the moment, and that's really just for lack of time, because there's so much else going on. But at some stage, I should probably get down to doing a revision of at least some parts of the course, bringing it up to date, and putting in new materials. But the simple answer is, to your question, is right at the moment. No, right at the moment, it is as it is, and
okay.
you know, we're translating it into. There were some new units added a little while back, and as you know, those are being translated into Spanish. But I'll get around to it. It's on my list sometime. But one goes on learning, you know, all the time you are learning, and psychology is just one window that you can look at Buddhism through. You see, there's a lot of different approaches to trying to integrate psychology and Buddhism, and very often these actually consist of taking a Western psychological foundation and taking some techniques from Buddhism and fitting them into the Western way of thinking. Our approach has been the opposite, is to ground everything in Buddhist principles and use techniques from wherever. Technique is just technique. So if you're doing art therapy, you could do art therapy from a psychoanalytic perspective, you could do it from a cognitive perspective, you could do it from a Jungian perspective, you could do it from a Buddhist perspective. You see, like that. And I think this is the right way round, but a lot of the integrations are actually the other way round. But that means that the fundamental principles of Buddhism tend to be lost. Rather than it being a Buddhist exercise, it's really a Western exercise disguised as Buddhism, because Buddhist terminology and Buddhist techniques are being used. You can see this even with things like mindfulness. You know, mindfulness as we have it now is just a Western technique about how to reduce stress and so on. That's not what it is in the Buddhist scriptures at all. So there's been a sort of appropriation of something Buddhist into a Western framework. Well, just filling out the Western framework with Buddhist terminology and Buddhist techniques is not Buddhism.
You talk about that in the first conference in Madrid, I remember. Yeah, the different paradigm in both cultures, and from the Western, we try to take those methods or ways of doing things in order to respond to our own paradigm. So from there, it cannot work. It's the same machine doing the same thing with different ingredients, but doing the same thing. There is no a change, a deep change.
I read a very nice essay. I think it was by Mark Uno, but don't quote me on that. I think that's who it was by, who talked about having done a silent meditation retreat, I guess in California probably. And half the people participating in this retreat were Caucasian Americans, and half the people participating in the retreat were Chinese. And it was a silent retreat. They had Dharma talks. Otherwise, it was silent. So you could say this was an interesting experiment, because you had two populations who were receiving exactly the same input and having, in formal terms, exactly the same experience. And he said, right at the end of the retreat, they then had a feedback session. What have you got from this retreat? And he said it was so striking that the typical American participant said things like, well, this retreat has really helped me. This will help me to get on in my life. It'll help me to control my stress, and it'll make me much more effective in my work, and things of that kind. And the typical Chinese person said, well, this retreat's affected me so deeply. I just want to go back to my parents and tell them how sorry I am for all the trouble that I caused in my life. Well, these two outcomes, you can see, are hugely culturally conditioned. And what people got from in a sense, exactly the same experience was completely different. And I think this illustrates some of the difficulty of bringing Buddhism into the West. And it is something that I've experienced a lot, because I travel backwards and forwards, a lot. And I know that if I say certain things to a Western audience, everybody will smile and clap, and I say the same things in Asia, and people will look at me not having the faintest idea what I'm talking about. Yeah. And if I say things that will please and get teary eyes from people in Asia, and I come back and I say those in America, they'll think, he's gone off his head. What's he talking about? And there is such a gap here. And what looks on the surface like one thing, we're all talking about Buddhism, it's embedded in a paradigm, in a whole lot of deep assumptions. And being in the middle of this task of bringing it to the West, not easy at all. And there's a huge amount to learn.
But maybe I can add a perspective to that as a participant of the group that is being supervised. And it's really quite interesting. I've been in that first group and now in the second group, and I felt there's also, us all being in some way or the other trained in Western psychology, there's some gravity to that as well. Like cultural conditioning, there's also that psychological or psychology training conditioning in some way. And so to change that basis and meet on the basis of Buddhist psychology, that is quite some work, as you just said. Because one is so used to look at what we are talking about from a certain perspective, from our Western thinking, Western psychology thing, and then to change it, and also this for the participants, for the supervisors, for anyone to just take the different perspective, takes a lot of bit by bit work in some way. So it's quite interesting that now Sastama and Iris brought in this new approach of bringing some Dharma aspect in the beginning, because it was like a reminder of what we want to do here. This and so I found that quite helpful, and we are in a way still experimenting with that kind of format, I feel, and trying to find out how to do that, and I mean, and that is I felt that is interesting to try this way and see what that means for the rest of the meeting. How do we look at what we are going to talk afterwards? So, and it's not so easy to just say, okay, we are a Buddhist psychology group here, but what does it mean? How can we remember that while we are meeting? That is quite often the challenge.
Yes.
You see, I would tell you that I was a conventional clinical psychologist, and then conventional clinical supervisor in psychology for psychiatrists and psychologists, and then I began to practice, like for 15, I think, years ago, Buddhism. And then it happened. It's like I told you, whoever was in my talk about peacemaking. All of a sudden, I discovered in Buddhism, since I was practicing, and the way of peacemaking instead of conflict resolution in Buddhism are so very different, and not as techniques as you say, but as way of thinking and way of life and philosophy and perspective for peacemaking. And the same it happened to me in psychology, because while practicing it was then Buddhism, but it doesn't matter. Then I discovered all these things about coexistence and about emptiness, and I felt in my sessions that I am so many times in the not knowing, so many times in a kind of coexistence. It's not me that's saying something for interpreting something for the client. It's something that happens there. And then I understood that the perspective of Buddhism, or what we call later on Buddhist psychology, is the next step after the most modern attitude and perspective in Israel, in clinical psychology. That the most modern is the intersubjective and relational, because relational is about relations, and intersubjective is between subjects. But then in the Buddhism, it was much more advanced, because it was not about subjects or two subjects. It was about the whole thing, and it was about coexistence. It's not two of us. It's something which is, coexistence. And from that, then everything, everything was there in the psychology. The Brahma Vihara were there. The impermanence was there. The dukkha was there. The Four Noble Truths was there. Everything was there in the psychology of the two people who are in the interaction, the therapist and the client. And then I understood now that the Buddhist psychology is not only for psychologists, because also as a mother, like someone asked us when he came to the supervision group, he said, I'm in coaching, so maybe it's not Buddhist psychology, Buddhist therapy, but it's about Buddhist psychology for everybody. I'm Buddhist psychologist as a mother, because I'm not psychologist there. I'm a mother in an interaction. I'm channeling something. It's not about my ego. I can let go of my ego as a mother, as an interactor in the environment, and it changes everything. And this is really, as you said, Nati, it's not about enlightening, but it enlightens our lives in a way. So Buddhist psychology is not only for therapists or psychologists, it's about everyone, because this is about Buddhism. But this is a good way to look at our lives, especially in the community, in the environment, as actors and co-actors wherever. So this is the big thing, and that's why we have this passion, I think. Sorry for being passionate, because it is forbidden, but still.
I fully agree with you. Fully
Yes.
agree. Yes.
Yes.
I have this is Michelle. I am a layperson. I'm not a psychologist. I have a question from the left field. I've been thinking that we do not have enough healthcare providers to address the mental health issues that are being triggered by the COVID crisis, the anxiety, the depression, and other issues. And I've been thinking that it would be of value to have people who are trained as compassionate listeners. But now that I'm hearing about the work that's being done or has been done in providing an online introduction to the concepts, I'm wondering if there's value in people studying that to be better lay people to serve each other.
I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying about the importance of people being able to listen and understand. And that's not just Buddhist. I mean, that's universal. And of course, the COVID crisis is huge. So one would need as many as possible, as you might say. But the kind of, I suppose, just applying Buddhist principles in a very simple sense, we can say there are huge numbers of people with stress and distress in relation to the COVID crisis. But that is not one issue or one problem. Each person that is affected actually has a different set of conditions impinging upon them. So there is not really one expertise here that's needed. The nurse who's run off her feet and terrified of catching the disease because she has to go into a hospital every day where there's a high risk of catching it is not the same case as the person whose grandmother has just died of the disease, which is not the same as the problem of the young mother who's confined to a small apartment somewhere and trying to homeschool her kids because we're all in lockdown, and is perhaps having rows with her husband at the same time, is not the same as and so on. Everybody who's caught up in this crisis has a unique set of impinging conditions that are supporting the response that they are then experiencing. So yes, broadly, listening and understanding is a good thing, but each case is unique and different, and applying one's principles, one has to try and understand the conditions that are supporting the state in the particular case. You can have two human beings, and it works both ways around. You can have what seems like one problem, but actually it's completely different from one person to another. You can also even have people who are in the same set of conditions, and they respond to it in different ways because they construe those conditions differently. And a good deal of Buddhist training is actually of that kind, that we learn to construe things in a healthier way, rather than being defeated by them. We find the silver lining, if you like. So I agree with you, and there's more to be considered. But yes, I mean, the more sympathetic listening and so on, the more empathy. This is all to the good. But you also need skills in understanding what will help in a particular case. Listening alone, sometimes enough, but often not enough.
I also have a stupid amateur question from an outsider in one sense. I utterly make sense what you say about individual cases and conditions. Is there an illusion, but I guessed myself that there was a concept of what constituted health or mental goodness, which is sort of captured a bit by the Eightfold Path, right understanding, etc. Is there a shared human understanding of what is mental health? Because you illustrate it with an American who might say mental health is that I'm the best golfer I could be. That may not count as mental health, to somebody who is not playing a benign role in their family and community. So I'm just asking, is there a shared common vision of what a mentally healthy world is, what a great global Sangha would be if we succeeded?
Well, no, I think the answer to that, if I'm getting your question right, I think the simple answer is no. If I've got a client in front of me, I have a faith that that person is on their path. But I don't have an assumption that I know what that path is. I have to find out. and it may be different from one person to another. One person, you know, if we use that analogy of pathways, one person may be heading north, another person may be heading south. They may both have important things to do in their different destinations. I can't assume, a lot of Western psychology is on that sort of model. It's an assumption that I, the therapist, am the expert who knows what mental health is, and my job is to take this client and fit them into that health. But that's not my assumption as a Buddhist psychologist. My assumption as a Buddhist psychologist is that each person is on their spiritual path, and I can't presume to know where that path is going. I can investigate, and I might gradually get an intuition of what it's about. As I start to understand the trajectory of this person's life, why they are as they are, how they got there, I may start to see something of, never the whole of, but something of, what is the meaning of this person's life? And the meaning of this person's life is not the same as the meaning of the next person's life. Thank goodness. So you did talk about like the harmony of the whole, and I think Iris would probably say things about like how all these different bits, if you actually were capable of assembling them all together, would make one whole, as it were. So in that sense, yes, there's a sort of vision, or a faith, really, because you're never going to achieve it, but you can have a faith in that sort of direction. But the important thing is that each person is on a path. As the same as a spiritual teacher. I don't have a one size fits all notion of what a Buddhist life is. You know, Honen, the great founder of Pure Land in Japan, he says, if family life is impeding your faith, then go and get ordained and become a monk. If being a monk is impeding your life, give it up and get married and have children. You know, like that. Different people, what's right for one person is not right for everybody. And so very much, you know, a client, typically, stereotypically even, a client comes to therapy and they say, I want to get to such and such a point, or I want to change such and such a thing in my life. My first point of departure is, well, I wonder why. I don't immediately buy into, oh, right, that's the goal, so that's how we must get you there. I wonder why. How did you get to where you are now? Because where you are now is meaningful. Where you are now tells us something about the set of conditions that are making you what you are. And you might be fed up with it, but, but it is what you are. That is the truth of now. And that's the first thing I want to know about. So, yeah.
I see that. I mean, so find your right path. I mean, I sort of think, all right, supposing Adolf Hitler comes to you for therapy, and Barack Obama or Mother Teresa, you know, does Adolf Hitler, who says, I know my right path, this is it, does that count as health?
Well, I'm not interested in health. I'm interested in understanding where that person is at, you see, okay. and what are the conditions that have contributed to that, you see. There are reasons. There will be reasons. I have a faith that there are reasons, you know, why Adolf was the way he was.
Yeah.
And if Adolf were to come and see me and I'm the therapist, I wouldn't be making a judgment about, in the moral sense, about you are a good man or you're a bad man or whatever. I'd want to know, this is fascinating. This person, you know, he is as he is. A most interesting case. come and tell me about it. I want to know. You know, you meet my other friend here. He has something in common with you. He is called Genghis, you know, and he has. Let's tease out what this is about.
But I thought, I mean, the word theft.
There is an amazing book which was written by this woman Madi Gizela, who was the psychologist of the Truth and Reconciliation Committees in South Africa. And she wrote a book by the name of That Night a Human Being Died. And the book is about sessions that she had with the cock. You know, the cock was the kind of monster of the apartheid. And she's writing and she's describing her way with him. And in some points, she is even describing a feeling of identification and compassion for him. She's talking about an interaction. This is a very interesting book about kind of Adolf Hitler or the cock. But I also wanted to say something. Adolf Hitler is an example of, you know, a client that comes to you and you maybe you have problems with his morality, like if some terrorist will come to me, or a very rightist person in Israel or such. This is one thing. The other thing is your question, George, about mental health. And I agree with you, Dharmavidya, that we are not about mental health, because we are about exploring and guiding, co-exploring and guiding the client, our partner, to the interaction is spiritual path. And even I don't like anymore to identify, to define myself as a like psychologist or something like that, but like a guide, or because I don't want to do, you know, definitions that make separation and split, But and for an more extreme example is that if someone who was diagnosed once as like eating disorder, having eating disorder, for example, I was the supervisor, psychologist in department, in hospital, in department of eating disorders. Now, what is eating disorders? It is a diagnosis. We are not doing it anymore. We are talking about a person. We are talking about a story. We are talking about a family. It's in this case, it's not only about the client that comes. In this case, it's about the family. It is about the community. Sometimes we bring to the session many other partners to explore the path of this adolescent that once was like identified or diagnosed as eating disorder. But the last thing that I have to say, that really sometimes we have problems. It's not, I don't think that it's about most of the people who are having or learning Buddhist psychology and doing kind of helping and coaching and therapy and such. But sometimes we have really people in danger. But also then I wouldn't call him schizophrenic or suicidal person. I will feel that he is in danger. So maybe I will need to get some medical help. But again, it's not. I had a person that once I would, in my private clinic, alone at home, very late at night, I got him. And I know in my mind, in my historical mind, in my previous condition mind, that he is schizophrenic, paranoid, and he's in danger for himself and for me. And still, I was sitting with him, and again, and I was looking at the person, and I was listening to his amazing stories. I was listening to his rupa, to his reality, to his illusions, and all of that was the materials with which we were advancing in the path now is working and is okay. It is also about faith and trust in the Amida, and also in the universe that can help us, and also in the power of the coexistence and of the client. And we need to be courageous, but we can do it. I promise you, because I was there. I was
Yes.
in the other way, the other world.
I would just want to say quick thank you very much for that. Very helpful, because the sickness health model, I think, needs examining. I agree. And I think people are familiar with Buddha's story about if there's a poison arrow in you, you pull out the poison arrow, as well as spend hours analyzing. And I was speaking yesterday with a very good friend who is a dementia, as it were, expert, Julian Hughes, who said, of course, the big battle is to stop people using the word dementia in the first place. It's such an enormous label. So thank you very much. I'm really delighted. Thanks for the honesty of the replies as well. Really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, well, people, you know, you talk about Buddhist psychology, and often you get the kind of question of, does Buddhist psychology have a treatment for such and such a condition? Answer, no. Buddhist psychology has a way of responding to human beings. You know, everybody is human.
Yeah.
I'm very much admiring your work. Really fantastic. Congratulations for your courage.
Well, we keep on experimenting and learning together, and I think having a little group like this where you have some theme and you work together over a period, you learn such a lot, and I recommend it. Anyway, we have 10 minutes before the next event, so let's have a little break. And thank you all very much for bearing with us in this this sharing.
Thank you.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Thank you very much.
Namo Amida